Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for October 23rd, 2024. First off, today we are going to learn about celestial dating guidelines by reading a little card that was handed out to some youth. Go ahead and raise your hand if you were ever given something like this as a youth in the Mormon Church. It says, no dating anyone who is not qualified to attend the temple. No extended hugging and kissing sessions. No rubbing, massaging anywhere that would be covered by a garment. Oh, that's interesting. It seems that shoulder massages will be back in fashion now that the church has released the new sleeveless garments. No being together after midnight, because we all know that the Holy Ghost goes to sleep at midnight. I do feel kind of sad, though, for the people who have to work the graveyard shift and can't have the companionship of the Holy Ghost. Never, never be alone in a house or apartment. Don't be seen in night clothing. Night clothing? Who says night clothing? Always be fully dressed. Never ever go into a bedroom together. No parking. I know what no parking means. It means don't go out and sit in a car with someone because you can't do what you're about to do in front of your parents at home. But is that what teenagers call it nowadays, parking? Or is that an outdated term? No lying down together to watch TV. Always sit up. No lying on top of each other. No R or X-rated movies or videos. Long courtship, short engagement. That's so people won't get in trouble and have sex before they get married. Never do anything that would make your mother feel bad if she were watching you. Sorry, Mom. Discuss these guidelines with your partner. Did you ever think of Mormonism as just this huge eternal list of things that you cannot do? I know I sure have. When my kids were very young, I started reading and studying a lot about parenting, and one of the first concepts that I latched onto was finding ways to say things so I didn't have to say no and stop to my kids all the time. I'll give an example. Let's say that I took my kids to the fair, and they were gifted a train whistle from one of the booths. And then the next day, they enjoyed that train whistle for hours at a time until I thought my brain would explode. Right before I hit my breaking point, I could say something like, "You have to stop blowing that infernal whistle before my head blows up." Or, like I've said to my kids many times over the years, something along the lines of, "You're welcome to continue practicing your train whistle blowing skills outside." The church has a really long way to go in this regard, but I do think they're making baby steps. Or maybe like whatever comes before baby steps. That's probably where the church is. Which brings me to the next article from LDS Living about the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet. It says, the first edition of the pamphlet, published in 1965, advised young women not to wear pants for shopping at school, in the library, in cafeterias, or restaurants. Between 1965 and 1972, 7 editions of the pamphlet were published, including the very first edition. A lot of the guidance in these early editions of FSOY was geared towards propriety and acceptable behaviors. Under the section of good grooming, it reads, not only should clothes be clean, but nails, skin, and hair should have the glow of health that bespeaks meticulous care and grooming. Youth were also reminded that it is not polite to run in and out of motel or hotel rooms late at night, making a disturbance which keeps other guests awake. How incredibly practical of them. Some of the directions in these earlier pamphlets are more detailed than the FSOY pamphlets we know today. For example, in the section titled Grubbies, Curlers, Hair Fashions, girls were counseled not to leave the house in their grubbies. My dad loved to use the phrase grubbies, and I'm realizing right now that his distaste for us wearing grubbies out of the house could have come from the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet. He actually got into a shouting match once with one of my younger sisters because she was trying to wear her pajamas to go to Walmart in the middle of the night to buy tampons. The next sentence states, a real lady does not go out in public to the market or to shops with her hair curlers. Young women were not only to avoid backless and strapless dresses because of immodesty, but also because, according to these early pamphlets, few girls or women ever look well in backless or strapless dresses. Such styles often make the figure look ungainly and large, or they show the bony structures of the body. Society must have changed drastically in the years to follow, because For the Strength of Youth was almost completely different when it was updated in 1990. The church standards remained the same, but the world seemed to be in more need of moral direction. You know, they're going to emphasize that more than once in this article, that the church didn't change, the world did. But as most of us know by now, the church and its standards have changed a lot. The title for the Strength of Youth is not new, explained Ardith Cap, the Young Women General President at the time, but because of the trend toward immorality and other ills in society, and also because of the expansion of the church into new geographical areas over the years, a more comprehensive, more explicit statement of church standards was needed. The 1990 edition of For the Strength of Youth contained several more sections of what Sister Cap said was needed, explicit statements of the church's standards. Youth were still taught about appropriate dress and dating as in earlier editions, but topics like language, sexual purity, mental and physical health, and Sunday behavior were added. There were still some specific directions on subjects such as dress. While pants and grubbies no longer raised concern, short shorts, tight pants, and other revealing attire, including off-the-shoulder and low-cut shirts, became an issue. Youth were counseled to dress in such a way as to bring out the best in yourself and those around you. That is a clear example of how some standards have changed. Off-the-shoulder shirts were prohibited in the past in the Strength of Youth pamphlet, and now the church is producing garments that will allow people to show their shoulders. In 2001, FSOY expanded from just 19 pages to 44. This pamphlet was geared even more toward spiritual principles, with sections such as agency and accountability, gratitude, and go forward with faith. The Living Christ and the Family, a Proclamation to the World were also added to the back of the pamphlet, and instead of a picture of youth on the front, the cover displayed a picture of the temple. The introduction to the dress and appearance section illustrates this more spiritual update. Your body is God's sacred creation. Respect it as a gift from God, and do not defile it in any way. Through your dress and appearance, you can show the Lord that you know how precious your body is. Youth were not only supposed to dress appropriately because it was socially acceptable, but because of their spiritual beliefs about the body. In December of 2011, the church announced it would release a new and updated version of the pamphlet. A lot of material in the updated version of FSOY was the same as before, but some additions were clearly vital for the time. In the music and dancing section, for instance, youth received this counsel: keep your music at a reasonable volume and remove your earphones when others are talking to you or want you to be part of their activities. This strikes me as funny because recently the Young Women and Young Men General Presidencies encouraged the youth to attend a church-sponsored concert with specific instructions to turn the lights down and turn the music up. Another interesting and certainly important addition comes from the section Sexual Purity. It counsels youth to avoid situations that invite increased temptation, such as late night or overnight activities away from home, or activities where there is a lack of adult supervision. I've seen this come up in my reading a lot lately, where the church is cautioning youth to not go camping together. I'm wondering if that's a real issue. I mean, of course it is, because they don't want youth spending time together outside of adult supervision, but come on. Just let these kids go camping. In October 2022 General Conference, Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf announced the release of a new version of the booklet available in 50 languages. A new subtitle, A Guide for Making Choices, was added. Even though FSOY has changed, the principles have remained consistent. No, they haven't. The standards have not changed, but times have changed. We've already spoken about why that's not true. Said Elaine S. Dalton, former Young Women General President, "For the Strength of Youth has been revised to address the issues youth face today, to teach them the doctrine behind the standards and the promised blessings of obedience. The new version, while it might be a lot less specific and nitpicky, still doles out the amount of shame needed to keep control over the youth." In the How This Guide is Organized section, it says each topic has 3 parts. 1, eternal truths or doctrine of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, aka here are the rules. 2, invitations to act on those truths, aka follow the rules. 3, promised blessings that the Lord offers to those who live by his teachings, aka if you want blessings, you better do what we say. Also, in the question and answers part of the Your Body is Sacred section, it says, what is the Lord's standard on dress, grooming, tattoos, and piercings? The Lord's standard is for you to honor the sacredness of your body, even when that means being different from the world. Let this truth and the Spirit be your guide as you make decisions, especially decisions that have lasting effects on your body. Be wise and faithful and seek counsel from your parents and leaders. They will tell you to avoid tattoos, piercings, and alcohol because it can have lasting effects on your body, while simultaneously not just making it okay but encouraged to meet someone at BYU, get married 2 weeks later, make an eternal covenant to stay together forever, and then start having kids right away. I feel like those things can definitely have lasting effects. And if you're a young church member who's listening to this, it's okay to wait to get married, and it's okay to live with someone for a while to see if you're compatible. Now on to Latter-day Saint Mag for an article with the title, Can There Be Any Valid Criticisms of the Church by Daniel Peterson. This article will give all of us a ton of good information about Daniel Peterson. He says, I saw this title or something like it on a Latter-day Saint related message board. I never read through the thread there, and now I probably wouldn't be able to find it. But I once posted something on this subject and have been attacked ever since for what I said by people who plainly didn't understand what I said. If you haven't heard the term persecution complex before, Daniel Peterson is giving a really good example in that last sentence. So I thought, what the heck, I'll try it again. Yes, there can be valid criticisms of the church, both of the church as an assemblage of people and of the church as an institution. To choose a few trivial examples, we as saints could and should be doing better at ministering, attending the temple more often, be more active missionaries, be better at family history research, be more charitable in our behavior, be more service-oriented. More of our youth should be serving as missionaries. Our musical and artistic tastes might be better. Our movie-going and novel-reading preferences might be more consistent with our values, more elevated. We should ourselves generate better literature and movies and art. You're right, Dan, those things are pretty trivial when stacked up against the real historical problems of the church and the integrity problems that they have had recently with reporting abuse and reporting their financial dealings to the SEC as is required by law. As far as the church itself goes, the Lord himself has been critical of it from time to time, as have its leaders, but here are some fairly insignificant criticisms that I myself have offered. Our art and architecture have sometimes been pretty uninspiring. Our Sunday school and other manuals have often been quite uninteresting. Our meetings are sometimes boring. Thanks for saying a whole lot of nothing, Dan. I expect that some readers will want me to share some more serious areas of disagreement with church leaders and some weightier criticisms. I'm afraid that I'll have to disappoint them. I'm not going to be lured into public attacks on my church, and anyway, A, that's not the point of this post. What is the point of this post, Dan? And B, I don't really have any truly serious criticisms or areas of disagreement. I am, to use the silly language favored by one faction of critics, a chapel Mormon. Mainstream and orthodox, not for the sake of being mainstream and orthodox, but simply because that's what I actually believe. I do start to wonder if part of his beliefs entail following the teachings of Jesus, because when he's making fun of people and calling their language silly, I don't think that's something Jesus would have done. Here, though, is the more serious question that some really want to ask. Can there be any valid evidence against the church? To which Dan's answer is, no, there cannot. My answer presumes the church to be true. Why? Because I believe it to be. Notice that he didn't say not because it is true, only because he believes it to be. That's a very interesting choice of words. Since the church is ex hypothesi true, there can be no genuine evidence that it is false. There can, of course, obviously be seeming evidence against its claims, evidence that reasonable people might well regard as genuine and damning. In the end, though, on the assumption that the claims of the church are true, what seems to be genuinely damning evidence against it must ultimately prove not to be such. There is evidence that the sun goes around the earth. For millennia, close watchers of the sky thought that it did, and they had reasons for thinking so. However, we can now explain those reasons, that evidence, in other ways. Is this similar, Dan, to people thinking that there was evidence and reasons for the Book of Mormon to be historical, and now we can explain those evidences and reasonings away? There might be evidence strongly suggesting that Frank killed Bob, but if in fact it was Jim who killed Bob and not Frank, the evidence suggesting that Frank was the murderer must eventually be reinterpreted as demonstrating no such thing. His analogies are weird. It's in that sense that I say that there can, in the end, be no valid evidence against the claims of the Restoration and the restored church. Ultimately, you see, there can never be proof that something that is true is actually false. But that also doesn't mean that it's true. Good critics can be a blessing. As a grinding wheel sharpens a knife, they can, and often do, sharpen arguments and help to clarify propositions. Incompetent critics, by contrast, those who regularly grossly misread what their opponents say and who fail to grasp arguments and issues, are pretty much useless and a waste of time. Unfortunately, though, they're both prolific and extremely vocal across the web. It takes real discipline to ignore them. I think the moral of the story here is that, first of all, Dan is going to make fun of people who have beliefs that are different than his, and he's not going to address any real criticisms about the church. he's just going to ignore them. Now we will go to the Salt Lake Tribune for an article that says a TV movie about Ruby Frankie, the Utah parenting influencer convicted of aggravated CA, is set to premiere this month, and Frankie's estranged eldest daughter has called the film trash. Mormon Mom Gone Wrong, the Ruby Frankie story, is scheduled to debut on Lifetime this Saturday at either 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. Mountain Time, depending on which cable and satellite system one uses, and can be found on Hulu and other streaming services on Sunday. Sherry Frankie, the oldest of Ruby Frankie's 6 children, posted on her Instagram story on October 4th that none of us were contacted about the movie. None of the proceeds are going to the kids. I saw the trailer suddenly in class and had an anxiety attack, Sherry Frankie wrote. This movie is trash and only hurts my siblings more. Please do not support this movie. Sherry Frankie, now a student at Brigham Young University, testified last Wednesday before a Utah legislative committee calling herself a victim of family vlogging. She urged lawmakers to consider the ethical and financial issues that come from being a web influencer, particularly when putting one's family on camera. There is never ever a good reason for posting your children online for money or fame, Sherry Frankie said. There is no such thing as a moral or ethical family blogger. Lifetime's publicity materials for the movie describe how Frankie, her husband, and their 6 adorable kids were part of the YouTube channel 8 Passengers, which the network called a web series documenting the group's everyday life and Ruby's Latter-day Saint-influenced parenting style. Frankie's perfect life, Lifetime publicists wrote, took a turn for the worse when Ruby's marriage counselor Jody Hildebrandt entered their lives. The description continues, Jody and Ruby's views of disciplining children were not strict parenting, but actually abuse. And I love that they make that distinction. I used to tell people that my dad was strict, when in reality he was abusive. I said it because that's what society wanted to hear. I don't use that term anymore. I just say the truth and tell people that my dad was abusive. The movie stars Emily Ullerup, a regular on the Hallmark Channel series Chesapeake Shores, as Frankie. Heather Locklear, best known for her starring role on the 90s nighttime soap Melrose Place, portrays Hildebrandt. The movie was shot in Canada earlier this year. A Lifetime spokesperson said Friday the network would not make a copy of the movie available to critics before it airs. The movie is one of 6 of Lifetime's Ripped from the Headlines series of true crime stories scheduled to premiere this fall. And today we will finish up with this quote from an unknown source that I think applies to the church. Please let me know your thoughts. It says, "To anger an honest person, lie to them. To anger a narcissist, tell them the truth." And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.